In February of 2013, guests staying at a historic downtown Los Angeles hotel began complaining about the water. The water pressure in their rooms had suddenly dropped. When it did run, it came out with an unusual color and an even stranger taste. One guest later recalled that the water was dark and metallic, while another said it carried an odor that was difficult to describe, but impossible to ignore. For several days, the complaints continued, growing louder and more urgent. Finally, a maintenance worker was sent to the roof to inspect the hotel's water tanks. What he discovered inside one of them would turn an obscure hotel incident into one of the most unsettling internet mysteries of the decade. Inside the tank was the body of a 21-year-old student from Canada. Her name was Elisa Lam, and weeks before she was found, the Los Angeles Police Department had released surveillance footage from a hotel elevator that showed her behaving in a way that many viewers found deeply disturbing. The video quickly spread across the internet. Millions of people watched as Elisa stepped in and out of the elevator, pressed multiple buttons, hid in the corner as if avoiding someone who wasn't visible, and made strange gestures toward the empty hallway outside. To this day, the footage remains one of the most widely analyzed pieces of surveillance video ever released. Because the question it raises is simple: what exactly happened to Elisa Lam inside the Cecil Hotel? And why, in those final moments caught on camera, did she seem to be reacting to something that no one else could see? The Cecil Hotel stands on Main Street in downtown Los Angeles, a towering concrete structure built in the 1920s during a time when the city was expanding rapidly and optimism about the future seemed limitless. When it first opened its doors in 1927, the hotel was meant to be elegant. Marble floors decorated the lobby, palm trees framed the entrance, and travelers arriving in Los Angeles were greeted by an atmosphere that promised comfort and luxury. But over the decades, the neighborhood surrounding the hotel changed dramatically. By the 1970s and 1980s, the Cecil sat at the edge of an area known as Skid Row, one of the most economically distressed districts in the United States. Crime, homelessness, and addiction became part of daily life in the surrounding streets. The hotel itself slowly developed a reputation. Over the years, it became associated with a long list of tragic events, including suicides, violent crimes, and unexplained deaths. Because of this history, many locals had already begun to view the building with a sense of unease long before Elisa Lam ever checked in. To them, the Cecil was not simply another aging hotel. It was a place where things seemed to go wrong. Elisa Lam was born in Vancouver, Canada in 1991. She was known by friends as thoughtful, intelligent, and deeply introspective. Like many young people navigating early adulthood, she had begun documenting her thoughts online through a personal Tumblr blog where she wrote about books, music, travel, and her struggles with mental health. In early 2013, Elisa decided to take a solo trip along the west coast of the United States. She visited San Diego and planned to continue north towards Santa Cruz and San Francisco. Traveling alone was something she had always wanted to do, and for her, it represented both independence and a chance to explore the world beyond her familiar surroundings. When she arrived in Los Angeles on January 26th, she checked into the Cecil Hotel. At first, her stay appeared completely ordinary. She shared a room with other travelers in the hotel's budget accommodation area, known as Stay on Main. Within a few days, however, hotel management reportedly moved her to a private room after her roommates complained about what they described as unusual behavior. Exactly what that behavior involved was never fully explained, but the timeline of events suggests that something had already begun to change. On January 31st, 2013, Elisa Lam was last seen alive. That evening, she visited a bookstore near the hotel and spoke briefly with staff about buying gifts for her family. Later that night, she returned to the Cecil. What happened after that remains uncertain. 3 days later, when Elisa failed to check out of the hotel and stopped contacting her family, concern quickly turned into alarm. Her parents contacted authorities, and the Los Angeles Police Department launched a search operation. Police officers canvassed the hotel, searched nearby streets, and even used dogs to inspect the building. But despite these efforts, there was no sign of her. 2 weeks later, investigators made a decision that would transform the case into an international mystery. They released security footage from an elevator inside the hotel. A young woman enters the elevator. She presses several buttons. Then something strange happens. Instead of waiting for the doors to close, Elisa suddenly steps into the hallway and looks around the corner, as if she is checking whether someone is approaching. She moves back inside the elevator, presses more buttons, and then retreats again into the hallway. The elevator doors remain open the entire time. What follows has become the most analyzed moment in the entire case. Elisa begins moving her hands in unusual ways, making wide, almost theatrical gestures in the air, as though she is communicating with someone outside the camera's view. At one point, she hides against the wall of the elevator, peering cautiously into the hallway, as if trying to avoid being seen. Then she steps out. The elevator doors finally close. Elisa Lam never appears on camera again. In the days following the release of the video, the internet exploded with speculation. But outside the online world, investigators continued gathering information from people who had actually encountered Elisa during her stay. One of the last people to speak with her was a bookstore employee who remembered the conversation clearly. Elisa had seemed cheerful, asking whether certain books would be too heavy for her to carry while traveling. Other hotel guests recalled seeing her in the lobby or hallways during the days before she disappeared. None of them described anything that suggested immediate danger. However, a few mentioned that she sometimes appeared distracted or withdrawn. None could explain the strange behavior captured on the elevator camera. As investigators learned more about Elisa Lam's personal life, another layer of the mystery began to emerge. Elisa had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Friends and family later confirmed that she had struggled with episodes of depression and had been prescribed medication to manage her condition. Some experts reviewing the elevator footage suggested that her movements might reflect a psychological episode, possibly triggered by stress, travel, or irregular medication use. However, this explanation raised new questions rather than resolving the mystery. Even if Elisa had been experiencing a mental health crisis, investigators still needed to determine how she reached the hotel's rooftop water tanks. The tanks were located on a secured roof area that required either a key or access through a locked alarm door. And the tanks themselves were tall cylindrical structures that would have been extremely difficult to enter without assistance. On February 19th, a maintenance worker climbed onto the roof to inspect the water system. After guests complained about the strange taste and color of the water, he opened one of the large metal tanks. Inside, floating in the dark water, was Elisa Lam. The discovery shocked investigators for several reasons. The lid of the tank was heavy and positioned several feet above the surface, meaning it would have required significant effort to open. Climbing into the tank would also have been extremely dangerous. Once inside, escaping would have been nearly impossible. Even more unsettling was the condition in which Elisa was found. Her clothes were floating separately in the water. Once the details became public, the internet began constructing theories. Some believed Elisa had been pursued by someone inside the hotel, and that her strange behavior in the elevator reflected an attempt to evade a threat. Others suggested that the Cecil Hotel's long history of violence might somehow be connected. Theories even emerged linking the case to obscure government experiments, paranormal activity, or elaborate cover-ups. While many of these ideas lacked credible evidence, they spread rapidly online and further complicated public understanding of the case. When the Los Angeles County coroner completed the autopsy, the official cause of death was ruled accidental drowning. Toxicology reports indicated that Elisa had taken some of her prescribed medications, but not all of them. Experts suggested that this irregular pattern could have contributed to disorientation or confusion. In other words, the most straightforward explanation is that Elisa somehow reached the rooftop alone and entered the tank during a mental health episode. But even investigators acknowledged that some aspects of the case remain difficult to reconstruct. Exactly how she reached the roof and climbed into the tank without attracting attention is still debated. Years later, the elevator video continues to fascinate viewers. Was Elisa reacting to someone in the hallway who simply never appeared on camera? Were the elevator doors malfunctioning? Or were her movements simply the result of fear and confusion that we now interpret as something more mysterious? The footage offers no clear answers, and because it captures only a few minutes of a much larger story, it leaves room for endless interpretation. There is something uniquely unsettling about unsolved mysteries. Perhaps it is the way they expose the limits of our understanding, reminding us that even in a world filled with cameras, technology, and constant observation, human experiences can still disappear into uncertainty. The story of Elisa Lam sits at the intersection of tragedy and speculation. A young traveler arrived in Los Angeles searching for adventure and independence. Weeks later, her final moments became one of the internet's most debated videos. But behind every theory and every frame of that surveillance footage is a simple reality. Elisa Lam was not a mystery, she was a person. And whatever happened inside the Cecil Hotel during those final hours is a story that only she ever fully knew. If you enjoy dark mysteries and forbidden history, subscribe to the Black Archive.